everyone, it's your girl, Miss Anna Little Cole, and I'm coming to you live on this quiet, cool, calm Monday evening. So before the day is over, I just want to take the time to commemorate a young man whose life not only touched the world and changed the world, but someone who I consider to be a great human being and an American icon, as well as an American hero. He only lived to be 18 years old, but what he did in the life he led helped to change the world for the better, for all mankind and humankind. Although he was dealt a terrible card in life, he used that card to basically make life better for himself as much as possible, and he cared about humanity. And what he did with that card is he made sure that those who were living and dying of AIDS and HIV like him would be able to receive the treatment that they could not afford, and fighting for the advancement of medicine to allow AIDS and HIV patients to live not only longer, but productive and fulfilling lives. And that young man that I will be discussing today is none other than Ryan Wayne White. Had he lived today, he would be celebrating his 50th birthday, his half centennial. That's what I call it. This young man was remarkable. He was incredible. And he was selfless. To me, he's the epitome of a person who walked the walk of a life that was pious and, in my opinion, followed the teachings of Christ. He was humble, he had humility, and he didn't judge anyone, and he was never angry, and he was never bitter with the life that he had and that he was born into, and what he would later have to overcome, and the fight for equal rights for AIDS and HIV patients, regardless of how the disease was contracted. He never, ever, ever, ever showed disdain to those that showed hatred towards him. So I'm going to read to you two articles, one from People magazine and one from Teen Vogue. So, People magazine posts, Ryan White, who died of AIDS at 18, would have turned 50 today. In quotation, he made the world better. He put a human face on HIV, reduced the stigma of the diagnosis, and changed the world, starting with the U.S., reads one 50th birthday tribute for Ryan White. The world is remembering Ryan White on what would have been his 50th birthday. White was a hemophiliac who was diagnosed with AIDS in December 1984 following a blood transfusion, according to the Health Resources and Services Administration. The teen, who was from Kokomo, Indiana, was given 6 months to live at the time of his diagnosis, but went on to live another 5.5 years as he fought AIDS-related discrimination in his community and became a voice for AIDS awareness around the world. Just 1 month before his high school graduation, White died in April 1990 at age 18. In honor of what would have been his 50th birthday on Monday, which took place 5 days after World AIDS Day, White was remembered on social media for the massive impact he made on the world. Ryan White would have been 50 today. He made the world better for people with HIV. The advocacy organization Rise Up to HIV wrote in a post on Instagram, Ryan is not alive to celebrate his 50th birthday, December 6th, the organization wrote, but thousands of people living with HIV crossed the half-century mark recently. They might not realize it, but most of them have been helped in some way by Ryan. Along with his mom, Jeannie White Gender, and HIV activists across the country, Ryan achieved the unthinkable before his untimely passing in 1990 at 18. They added, he put a human face on HIV, reduced the stigma of the diagnosis, and changed the world, starting with the U.S. The Children's Museum in Indianapolis, which has a room inside their Power of Children exhibit to honor White, also paid tribute to his legacy of courage and compassion. One of his biggest goals was to live normally and help others with HIV/AIDS live normal lives, they wrote. In another tribute, Avita Pharmacy, a national pharmacy services organization, reflected on his courage and advocacy. Months after his death, Congress passed the Ryan White Care Act, which provided more than $2 billion to help develop, improve, and maintain accessible and affordable systems of diagnosis, care, and treatment for those most at risk of HIV/AIDS, they wrote. As a result of these services, 87.1% of Ryan White HIV/AIDS program patients receiving HIV medical care are virally suppressed. Avita Pharmacy added, we are forever grateful for Ryan's courage and advocacy, which has impacted the lives of so many. Happy birthday, Ryan White. Wright became a symbol of hope during a time when fear and misconception about AIDS were prevalent in the United States. Following his diagnosis in 1984, fearful Kokomo authorities banned him from his middle school. People previously reported, and they sure did, I remember that, his mom sued to have him reinstated, while his family, including his little sister Andrea, were ostracized in the community. After a 9-month court battle, White returned to school, where obscenities were spray painted inside his locker, and students scattered when they saw him coming down the corridor. Why were they so scared? White wrote at one point during his health battle, per People's previous reporting. Maybe it was because I wasn't that different from everyone else. I wasn't gay. I wasn't into drugs. I was just another kid from Kokomo. Maybe that made me even more of a goblin. While he fought the discrimination, White became the object of national admiration, championed by a number of celebrities, including Elton John. John's friendship with the teen was so profound that he served as a pallbearer at White's funeral, and later revealed in October 1929 that White's death inspired him to get sober. When he died, being there in Indianapolis and coming back to the hotel and complaining about the wallpaper, the decor in the room, John shared on Today at the time, I'm thinking, you are the most ungrateful little bastard. You complain about everything. This boy has never complained about attracting HIV and AIDS from a blood transfusion. He's never complained. He's only encouraged to get people to get tested. How could I have been one of them? John, now 74, added, of course, I could have become HIV positive. I was very lucky. I was blessed, and I always thought it was for the reason, when I got sober, that I would give something back. 4 months after White's death, Congress passed the Ryan White Comprehensive AIDS Resources Emergency Care Act, which sought funding to improve the availability of care for low-income, uninsured, and underinsured victims of AIDS and their families. His legacy is still felt today, with his mom telling NBC affiliate WTHR in April 2020, the 30th anniversary of White's death, that her son was passionate about educating others. No matter how upset I was at everybody and people and the things people were saying, he was always turning the other cheek and saying, Mom, that's why we have to educate people. White Gender recalled to the outlet, we want to tell Ryan's story. We want to educate people about bullying because I think that is what Ryan would have wanted. And that's the end of that article. And yeah, and you see, humble, never had a bad thing to say about people. Even though he was bullied by people in the Kokomo town. Now, according to Teen Vogue, this reads politics. Ryan White The teen who contracted AIDS shifted narrative around the disease. Ryan White's story both reinforced and challenged assumptions about AIDS and HIV. Ryan White had been sick throughout the summer and fall of 1984, plagued by chronic night sweats, diarrhea, stomach cramps, and exhaustion. By the time he turned 13 on December 6th of that year, Ryan couldn't take it any longer. He told his mother, Jeannie, that he can't even get off the school bus without being tired. Several days later, Ryan ran a fever of 104 degrees, at which point Jeannie rushed him to the local hospital in Kokomo, Indiana. There, doctors concluded that Ryan had antibiotic-resistant pneumonia in both lungs. He was subsequently transferred to Raleigh Hospital for Children in Indianapolis, where medical specialists indicated that his pneumonia was likely viral rather than bacterial. Ryan, who had severe hemophilia A, frequently used Factor VIII, a blood clotting agent created with plasma pooled from thousands of donors and used to treat hemophiliacs' bleeding episodes. The specialists at Raleigh suspected that Ryan had acquired pneumocystis carinii pneumonia, PCP, through contaminated Factor VIII. At the time, a PCP or Kaposi sarcoma diagnosis served as a de facto AIDS diagnosis. Since such opportunistic infections were incredibly rare before the discovery and spread of AIDS in the early 1980s, when a biopsy determined that Ryan had in fact contracted PCP, it essentially confirmed that he had AIDS. So he didn't have HIV. He just had AIDS. Wow. Little did Ryan, Jeannie, or anybody else know that Ryan would become the most famous person living with AIDS in the United States, if not the world, until his death from AIDS-related causes in April 1990. Paradoxically, Ryan's fame could be attributed both to his seemingly normality and his status as an exceptional victim. As Jeannie put it in February 1986, Ryan helped show the world another side of AIDS. When he passed away at the age of 18, NBC Nightly News called him the young man who taught the world that not all AIDS victims are gay, abuse drugs, or live in big cities. For all that Ryan did to challenge harmful and oversimplistic conceptions of AIDS, his story, especially as it was presented at the time in the national press, also reinforced existing notions of guilt and innocence. Because White had fallen ill through no fault of his own, as many put it, those familiar with his story could easily blame gay men and other historically subjugated groups for Ryan's plight, while ignoring the broader institutional and societal failures that had sparked the AIDS crisis in the first place. And now similar patterns of blame and absolution have emerged during the pandemic in the U.S. People of Asian ancestry have been marginalized and abused. And I wish I would have caught that. So I'm going to skip over that because I know what they're talking about, but I just want to speak about Ryan. So more than anything else, Ryan wanted to be normal. All I ever wanted to do was be one of the kids. He explained in his posthumously published autobiography, Ryan White, My Own Story, co-written with Anne Marie Cunningham. Although his severe hemophilia meant that a bleeding episode could prove fatal, Ryan and his mother Jeannie treated the affliction as a minor setback, one that could be overcome or at least managed through modern medicine and a positive attitude. Handling this thing was very much a matter of attitude. Jeannie wrote of Ryan's hemophilia in her own memoir. The White family approached Ryan's AIDS diagnosis in a similar way. When Ryan learned that he had AIDS in December of 1984, he allegedly told his mother, "Let's just pretend I don't have it." Accordingly, he hoped to return to school once he was healthy enough to do so. But Western School Corporation, WSC officials in Russiaville, Indiana forbade Ryan from receiving in-person instruction at WSC schools, citing his illness and the safety of other students. Their decision derailed Ryan's pursuit of normality. All I wanted to do was go to school and fit in, Ryan told People magazine in 1988. The decision also set off a media firestorm and a prolonged legal battle. The Chicago Tribune, Los Angeles Times, CBS Evening News, and other outlets covered the saga beginning in July 1985, and Ryan White soon became a household name. Letters supporting and opposing Ryan's campaign to attend WSC schools poured in from across the country and around the world. The blanket national news coverage forced many Americans to reckon with their own prejudices and preconceived notions concerning AIDS. Ultimately, Ryan secured the right to return to WSC schools in 1986, but the mistreatment he endured at the hands of classmates and community members caused the White family to decamp in 1987 for Cicero, a small town about 30 miles south of their home in Kokomo. By that point, Indiana Health Commissioner Woodrow A. Myers Jr., who rose to national prominence amid Ryan's fight to return to school, could confidently state that Ryan White is the best known living AIDS victim in the United States. Ryan's popularity hinged on his normality. As a white, middle-class, Midwestern, heterosexual teenager, Ryan punctured the notion that AIDS only affected deviant groups, particularly men who had sex with other men and people who used intravenous drugs. But because he seemed so divorced from the marginalized populations with which AIDS was more intimately associated, Ryan's saga bolstered the notions of guilt and innocence that structured the understanding of the AIDS crisis. Around the time that Ryan's story was capturing the national headlines, news media outlets were increasingly blaming gay men and intravenous drug users for contaminating the general public. For example, just before actor Rock Hudson publicly disclosed in 1985 that he was living with AIDS, the cover of Life magazine declared in bold red letters, no one is safe from AIDS, alongside a photograph of a seemingly concerned white heterosexual family. In this context, Ryan's status as an innocent victim was solidified. Ryan had supposedly gotten sick through no fault of his own, making him, according to one man who wrote to the Indianapolis Star in December 1985, an innocent victim of a terrible disease that spread to the straight population from the homosexual community. And as the Star's editorial board contended in 1987, it is not the Ryan Whites, the innocents who contracted disease through blood transfusions that the state must guard against. Pervasive stereotypes concerning gay men's sexual depravity and recklessness only hardened the innocent guilty binary at the heart of the white saga and the AIDS crisis more broadly. To his credit, Ryan never proclaimed his innocence, nor did he ever disparage gay men or blame them for his fate. As one gay Indianapolis news magazine asserted in an obituary wryly titled "Innocent Victim, Ryan White Dies," the teen spent his final years trying to quell AIDS hysteria and make it clear to people that anyone can get AIDS. To my knowledge, he never spoke derogatorily of the AIDS of the gay community. Yet, the obituary also took aim at the news media framing of White's story. White was consistently referred to as an innocent victim who contracted AIDS through no fault of his own. The piece read, "This is true, but the implications of these words are also that others, the gay community, are not innocent victims and that the fault is theirs." Moreover, the obituary argued that White was not so much a victim of AIDS as he was a victim of an inept and corrupt medical establishment. If the blood clotting agent which he was required to take for hemophilia had been properly screened, he would not have gotten the virus in the first place. The Ryan White story, with its focus on an exceptional and innocent victim who, in many ways, resembled the prototypical boy next door, obscured these structural conditions and enabled audiences to blame readily stigmatized communities rather than for-profit healthcare companies or a political system that often neglected and abuses minoritized populations. In some ways, the story culminated the Ryan White Comprehensive AIDS Resources Emergency Care Act, a federal law passed just months after Ryan's death in 1990. Although the CARE Act helped deliver much-needed federal funding for AIDS and HIV prevention and treatment, it also intensified existing stigmas by requiring states to implement criminal statutes to prosecute people engaging in conduct that might expose others to HIV. This federal requirement was repealed in 2000, but dozens of states maintain HIV-specific criminal laws today. Of course, there are crucial distinctions to be drawn between AIDS in the 1980s and today's pandemic. But as we mark what would have been Ryan White's 50th birthday, we would do well to consider how his story, his memory, and his specter loom over the crisis in which we find ourselves. After all historians, Emily Hobson and Dan Ross recently noted, the AIDS crisis is not over, and neither is the coronavirus pandemic. And I thought it was interesting. I didn't want to talk about the COVID mRNA because I feel that you shouldn't use Ryan White's story and his experience to connect it to COVID, because that's a whole nother topic. Even though there are a little bit of similarities, the only thing is that the AIDS crisis was an epidemic, because not all people, even though anyone could get AIDS, anyone could get HIV, not all people were as susceptible to get it as much as people with COVID. So I'm going to say this, and I'm going to say this in closing. As I said before, this young man was incredible. This young man didn't have a guilty bone in his body. But there's one person they left out of the story that's very important. Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson treated this boy with open arms. He showed this boy a childhood that he was missing out on, he couldn't have because of the stupid fucking town of Kokomo. Okay? Also, him and Ryan White had a lot in common. They were both born and raised in Indiana. They were Indiana kids. So they bonded through that. Another thing, too, is that Ryan White wasn't able to graduate from high school. He never got his diploma, at least while he was living. He received it posthumously, but he didn't get it because of the Kokomo town not wanting him to go to school. Ryan White did not become famous because he was a young boy who contracted AIDS. Ryan White became famous not only in the U.S. but around the world because of his fight to receive an adequate education as an AIDS patient. Okay? Because before he was a victim, he was a patient. That's what made him famous. And being discriminated upon by the people of Kokomo, and the mother says it best that they were using the terms godly and that God gave you AIDS and God's going to strike you, you're going to go to hell. What does that remind you of? What kind of people does that remind you of? It reminds you of people who are evangelical right-wing Christians. I would never want to go to Kokomo town. I would never, ever, 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 ever want to be in the same space of people that think like that. I think people like that are disgusting, they're deplorable human beings. But even with all that, Ryan White showed them that he could be a better person. And they were scared of him, and he said it best, because I was a heterosexual young man. I lived in the town and I looked just like them. And if I could have AIDS, they could catch it too. But look at what his legacy accomplished. AIDS centers, AIDS clinics, research. And look how long people live because of him. And there's others too. There's people with money who are famous. But it was Ryan White who changed the deceptive depiction and made it so that you don't have to fear somebody who have AIDS. And an innocent child can be an AIDS patient just like a person who uses drugs and who basically lives a life that is very hypersexual. I'm just going to say what it is. Or just a person who has a partner and contracted it because they didn't know. Or a person who got it as an adult from a blood transfusion. Anyone could get AIDS. And guess what? Anyone can still get AIDS. It's just the way it is. It's just that it's not as prevalent. Because of him, you have to check blood transfusions. You have to test the blood. It's because of him. If you go to a blood bank and donate blood, they have to test the blood first. It's because of him that you have to throw away needles. Why do you think they make sure you throw away the needles? Because of Ryan White. It's because of him that you have to use gloves. Did you know that there were doctors and nurses that were contracting AIDS from patients because when they were performing operations, the patients had AIDS and they didn't know it? Yeah. The boy changed the world. Okay? And as I say, put some respect on Ryan White's name. This is a hero. This is somebody who is godlike. This is somebody, in my opinion, who I would say is the closest, in my opinion, to Jesus Christ. Not these clowns that you see on TMB. The CBN network. This is a Christ-like person, if anyone. And his mother still carries his legacy. And the people in the town of Kokomo, nobody gives a damn about them. And that's a beautiful thing. And I just want to say, please share this commentary. Listen to it fully. Comment on it. And let's remember Ryan White, who would have been 50 years old. A lot of us complain about different things that goes on in our life. And, it's rightfully so. But Ryan White's story reminds me of a person who lived their life and never complains, did have a mean bone in his body. And I want to say that as a child watching Ryan White, I remember watching the news programs. And even when he passed away, there were news anchors that didn't have that compassion like they could have for him because it was still that stigma of he had AIDS. Because at the time, if you had AIDS, people would think that you were a drug user or you were gay. So it wasn't really something to you could be sad over, but you weren't like a cancer patient as a kid with, oh, I just want to help you and just want to hug you. You were treated like a pariah. I remember I would cry when I would watch the Ryan White story, and he was alive when that premiered. And I bawled my eyes out. And when he passed away, I'll never forget, I was in school and I cried. And for years, every time they would say Ryan White's name, I would just, tear up. Because I was like, he didn't live to be an adult. And even now, as I speak, I'm tearing up. And this is why I have this day for evangelical right-wing Christians. I can't stand them at all. I can't stand them because that was the group that did that to him. It was them. And they're even still doing stuff like this to this day. So it's your girl, Miss Analytical. I'm signing off. Make sure you comment, subscribe. Make sure you hit the notification bell. And Sharon, I'll talk to you real soon. Take care.